Okay, we know the Leafs position, as you mentioned. They want Mitch Marner as a Leaf. Specifically, a quote from Brad Tree Living here. We want Mitch here for a long time. What does Mitch want?
Only Mitch knows. I don't have any reason to believe he wants to leave, but clearly he wants more time to look at his situation, to consider his future, and potentially to peak at free agency. That's his right. And I think that it's easy for a story like this because the headline blares pretty loud, right? We don't actually have to sensationalize this at all. I mean, this is business. And, there's a lot of players. Let's take Nick Robertson as an example. Nick Robertson, early in his career, asked for a trade from the Leafs. And the Leafs said, we don't have to trade you. Essentially, what are you going to do? And ultimately, the summer passed last year, and he signed his new deal in September as a restricted free agent because the Leafs controlled his rights. Well, when you go deep enough in a career, as Mitch Marner has, now Mitch controls his rights. Mitch is free to sign with anyone in the league as of July 1st. He doesn't have to sign with the Leafs, or he doesn't have to make any decisions about his future before that time. And so, I don't know what Mitch wants. I mean, I think anyone who comes out and says they know with certainty where this is going or what the player wants, or I think that they're being foolish unless it's Mitch Marner himself or someone in his inner circle. And so, I still have every reason to believe he wants to be a Maple Leaf, but he obviously wants this negotiation to be done on his terms. And right now, those terms are he didn't want to negotiate during the season. And, we've seen other players take that posture in the past. There can be all kinds of reasons for that, starting with maybe just not wanting the distraction of thinking about business while you're doing your business. So I think what Mitch wants will become evident to us in time, because at some point he's going to have to make a decision, but he didn't have to make that decision on March 7th, as much as the Leafs naturally would want him to. I mean, teams look for that certainty ahead of the deadline. That's normal. But the Leafs didn't get it in this case. And so, they're going to do what they can to focus on the remainder of the season. Mitch is doing the same, but it's also natural for us in the media and for fans to be talking and thinking about this because, it's a huge moment in time for really, really good player in the NHL and for a franchise that's trying to get over the hump. And so all those things are colliding at once. And that makes this the story that it is.
If you could put a percentage on the likelihood of Mitch Marner testing free agency, where would you put it at?
I'd put it at maybe 40%. I think slightly less than 50-50 is where I'm going on this one. The Leafs still have some advantages here, right? They play in Mitch Marner's hometown. Mitch Marner's already the 5th leading scorer in franchise history. I mean, he's on track for, his jersey in the rafters kind of territory if he continues his career in Toronto. The Leafs can offer him an 8th season on his next extension. And while that's sometimes not as important to players, I think where Mitch is at in his career makes sense. He's going to turn 28 soon. So signing an 8-year deal takes him right through his prime. It's going to be in a life-changing amount of money no matter where he signs that next deal. And no matter what the exact AAV ends up being, there's a range, but that range all suggests he's going to be well taken care of. And so, I still think it's a little bit more likely than not that he, doesn't test free agency, that he signs an extension with the Leafs. But it's not a certainty, right? I mean, if it was a certainty, he's been eligible to sign this next deal since July 1st of last year. There's been a lot of time where that could have happened. And, to this point in time, the Leafs did try to engage him and his camp on those negotiations, and we're told we're not ready yet. And so, that's really kind of where it stands right now. I think, the element of this, is that's juicy, frankly, is that the Leafs at least put on the table the possibility of him moving. Again, I don't think that's done. That's not done in a threatening way. That's more done in okay, look, you don't want to talk about contract. Maybe you're not ready to make that decision. Would you consider, going somewhere else? Because we're looking for that certainty, right? We'd love to sign you, but if we're not able to sign you, we might want to look at what else is out there. And I think that this has been more of a conversation than like a dramatic moment. In fact, I think Mitch Marner and the Leafs on more than one occasion have discussed potentially waiving his no movement clause. I don't think it was just a one-time thing. And ultimately, obviously, they ended up where they did, where Mitch said, no, thank you. I want to be a Leaf. And we've still got a few months here to sort out the future. I mean, really now, once we get through this period where we're all focused on this and talking about it, it's probably going to go quiet until after the playoffs. I mean, I would be very surprised if any actual negotiations happen at this point, although you never say never. There's nothing in the rules that say you can't do that. Typically, the Leafs are an important stretch of their schedule too, right? And as a team, they haven't been playing too well. They're trending in the wrong direction. They've lost some games. I mean, there's a lot of things going on in this moment, but I do think, really once you get beyond the deadline where Mitch didn't waive his no movement clause, this just goes quiet and dark until after the Leafs have played their final game. And, they're going to hope that that's some point in mid to late June and that they're going to have to negotiate at a cup party, right? I mean, that's the ideal circumstance. I mean, look, that played out last year with Sam Reinhart. Sam Reinhart had a fantastic season for Florida, was a huge part of them winning a Stanley Cup. And then he signed an extension when he could have been a UFA, a day or two before free agency opened. And so, that's a path that, Marner and the Leafs could still follow here. I don't even think that that's implausible. I mean, maybe the Stanley Cup part is the part that you might have trouble you putting your head around. But I mean, the point being is even if the Leafs win out in the second round or some other point, there's still a world where Mitch Marner stays. I think he's got more reason to stay than to go, but, only he and his family know, what's in his heart, what's in his mind.
Do we at least have some idea what he might want from the Toronto Maple Leafs? And what does Mikko Rantanen's contract, how does that impact his potential ask?
It's an interesting one, and I've seen people kind of take it both ways. The truth is, we don't know what he wants because he didn't negotiate, right? Like, sometimes you get to this point, and it's because the team and the player couldn't find common ground. To my knowledge, and as I understand it, Marner didn't give the Leafs a number. Like, he didn't tell them what he wants because he wasn't ready to negotiate. And so I think it's fair for us to surmise he wants to be among the top paid players in the league. He has the stats to kind of ask for top of the chain money. I don't mean necessarily number one, but he's in the mix of the top 10 players in terms of what he can ask for. And then on top of that, we're in a rising cap environment. So obviously players in this case will argue for percentage of the cap. And so you take whatever Leon Draisaitl's 14 million was, when the cap was X, well, now it's Y. And you might try to get, somewhere above or around that. I mean, who knows? I think that we're at a point in the NHL, quite honestly, where people understand, when you sign in Texas or Florida or Nevada, places with no state income tax, that generally those cap hits are lower than when you sign elsewhere. And so I personally don't believe that while Mikko Rantanen has a statistical argument to be higher paid than Mitch Marner, he's got two 100-point seasons, a 50-goal season. At this point, Mitch doesn't have any of those things. He's got 1.25 points per game in the playoffs. Mitch is under a point per game. I mean, he's got some superior statistics to take into negotiations. He signed with one team. Mitch Marner conceivably is going to the open market. And so I can't predict what he's going to get. It wouldn't surprise me, I'll say this, if he gets $12.5 million times 8 from Toronto, which would be $100 million, nice round number. Whether he can push it higher than that, maybe. Some of that will depend on what happens next too. That's another element to waiting. And this is where I think it's interesting. I mean, you might be out there thinking, if you're in Mitch Marner's skates, why would you wait? There's risk for the player in waiting too, right? And give him credit because he's having his best statistical season. He's on pace for his first 100-point year in the NHL against the backdrop of this uncertainty. And what happens in the playoffs, could impact his market by some percentage, right? I mean, I'm not saying if he has a disastrous playoffs, I'm not saying he's going to get, it's not like the offers are going to go terrible. But if he has a great playoffs, I do think he can push his potential ask a little bit higher. And so, he's kind of betting on himself, I'd say a little bit by pushing off this decision. He's giving himself more time to evaluate where the Leafs are at, where he's at with his family and all that. But he's also giving teams more of a chance to evaluate what he is before having to make that call. Dallas signs Rantanen based on his track record. I mean, they signed him before he played a game for him. And so it's a long way of saying, to me, yes, Rantanen probably should be higher paid than Marner just based on the stats. But I think the circumstances and the conditions here could create the world where Marner makes more than $12 million on his next deal. And I do think if he stays in Toronto, he's probably going to be above that line. But, where I started all this, the Leafs don't even know exactly his number. I'm sure they're preparing for him to ask for a lot of money because he deserves it. But exactly where that dollar figure is, they never got down to business. I mean, that's part of the backdrop here is that the Leafs only go to Marner, requesting or saying, hey, would you waive this no move clause, because they didn't know exactly what he wants. He didn't want to engage with them.